Hey everyone, my name is Rich. Thanks for checking out this video about the Lock and Load tactical game system. Unlike my first two videos, which were playthroughs of scenarios found in the Lock and Load Tactical Starter Kit, with this video I'll be following mostly right along with the Vehicle and Ordnance gameplay narrative that's found on the Lock and Load Publishing website. The Vehicle and Ordnance gameplay narrative is an excellent learning tool, but I thought there might be someone out there who would appreciate having it in a video format, since there are different learning styles, and maybe sitting down and reading through the gameplay narrative isn't for everyone. But they might find that watching a video of that same material is right up their alley. In any case, while my first two videos used components from the Lock and Load Tactical Starter Kit, this one will use units from the World War II module Heroes of Normandy, but the rules that are presented regarding vehicles and guns are relevant to gameplay across all the Lock and Load Tactical World War II and modern era modules. Pretty much the only things we won't cover are fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters. So, since I'll be following along, for the most part, with the Vehicle and Ordnance gameplay narrative, that means this video, like the narrative, will be divided into two parts. In the first part, we'll be covering quite a bit of information that's found in the rules regarding vehicles and guns, and that will be laying a necessary foundation for the second part of the video, which will be a gameplay example. We'll actually play through one turn of an imaginary scenario that pits, on one side, a German armor and infantry force, including an anti-tank gun weapons team, against, on the other side, an American force of armor and paratroopers, with a mortar and also some off-board artillery thrown into the mix. All right, sound good? Okay, let's get started. In the Lock and Load tactical game system, vehicle counters are 7/8 inch in size and have a lot of information on them. A vehicle's name is always on the counter's lower right corner. Here's an American M4A1 Sherman and a German Panzer IV-H. A vehicle's morale is on the counter's upper right corner in a circle, the same as for infantry units. Here, both the Sherman and Panzer IV have a morale of 6. A vehicle's movement factor is under its morale. Here, both tanks have a movement factor of 10. All vehicles in the Lock and Load tactical system are one of three types: tracked, off-road, or road. Each type has a one-letter indicator next to the vehicle's movement factor. T for tracked, O for off-road, R for road. Tracked are usually fully tracked vehicles, such as tanks or self-propelled guns, and these vehicles can enter most types of terrain. Off-road are typically off-road capable multi-wheeled vehicles or partially wheeled vehicles, such as half-tracks and armored cars. Although here the German half-track is T, so it's classified as tracked for game purposes, apparently. And then road are usually all-wheel vehicles such as Jeeps and trucks that perform best on roads. The movement point cost to enter each type of terrain is listed on the relevant terrain effects chart, with each vehicle type having its own column, tracked, off-road, and road, and there's also infantry or leg units. P indicates that terrain is prohibited to that type of unit. A vehicle's passenger capacity is almost always to the left of its name. If the passengers ride inside the vehicle, the passenger capacity is P or double P, for example, like here with the German half-track. If the passengers ride outside and or on top of the vehicle, the passenger capacity is either PO or double PO. For example, like the Panzer IV, the Sherman, the M4 105mm howitzer assault gun, and the Jeep. Passengers are considered part of the vehicle and don't count toward AHEX's stacking limits until they disembark. Vehicles marked with a P or PO can carry one half squad, one support weapon, and one single-man counter. Those marked with double P or double PO can carry the equivalent of one squad, two support weapons, and two single-man counters. Then there are some that are marked with two double P, and those can carry the equivalent of two squads, four support weapons, and four single-man counters. But while this type of vehicle can theoretically carry four single-man counters, this is rarely ever actually an option or a good idea tactically. But at any rate, it couldn't unload them all at once since it would violate the AHEX's stacking limit of two single-man counters. Anyway, as you can see, the German half-track is marked double P, indicating its passengers ride inside, and it can carry the equivalent of one squad, two support weapons, and two single-man counters. The Jeep is marked PO, indicating its passengers ride outside or on top of the Jeep, depending how you want to think of it, and it can carry one half squad, one single-man counter, and one support weapon. The M4 105, Sherman, and Panzer IV are all marked double PO, so their passengers ride outside, and each can carry the equivalent of one squad, two support weapons, and two single-man counters. The lower left side of an armored vehicle's counter shows its armor factors. From top to bottom, they're listed as front, flank, and rear. If the vehicle has a turret, its hull armor factor is on the left side of a slash, and the turret armor factor is on the right side of the slash. And an easy way to remember this is that hull and turret are listed alphabetically from left to right. H and T. Hull and turret. So for example, the Sherman is a turreted armored fighting vehicle and has frontal armor factors of hull 5, turret 4, flank armor factors of hull 3, turret 4, and rear armor factors of hull 2, turret 3. If only one set of armor factors is listed without slashes, like for the German half-track, that means the vehicle doesn't have a turret and for game purposes only has hull armor factors. If one of the armor factors isn't a number, but an asterisk, then the vehicle has no armor in that facing. Then, unarmored vehicles, like the Jeep, don't have any armor at all, and therefore will have 3 asterisks in place of front, flank, and rear armor factors. The thickness of a vehicle's armor varies. The front armor is normally the thickest, flank armor less so, and rear armor is the weakest. And so it's not only important to know that a shot hits its target, but where it hits, whether front, flank, or rear. So during an ordnance attack on the vehicle, depending on the target facing. The armor factor that's used is based on the direction of the incoming shot, and that's depicted here in this illustration, whether the shot is coming from the front, the side, or the back. If the incoming shot is traced exactly down the line between hit locations, for example, between side and back, the shot is considered to hit the location most favorable to the firing unit. You may have noticed the red arrow in the upper left corner of a vehicle counter. Well, that arrow indicates the facing of the vehicle's hull. And a vehicle must always face one of the hex's vertices, which defines its covered arc, as depicted in this illustration. When moving forward, the vehicle must enter one of the two hexes in its covered arc. Now, a vehicle can also reverse, moving backwards, that is opposite its covered arc, but it has to pay double the hex's movement point cost. Vehicles can also pivot within a hex, paying 1 movement point per vertex. And then, significantly, the vehicle fires its weapons within its covered arc too, unless it rotates its turret or its machine gun firepower has an asterisk next to it, which indicates a 360-degree field of fire. Speaking of machine guns, let's pull up some German and Soviet armored fighting vehicles from Heroes of the Bitter Harvest and look at machine gun firepower. Vehicle MGs are the red underlined numbers at the top center of the counter. 2 firepower MGs have a range of 10 hexes, while 4 firepower MGs have a range of 14 hexes. Machine guns without an asterisk must fire in the turret's covered arc, or if it's a non-turreted vehicle, like the Stug 3 self-propelled gun here, those must fire in the covered arc of the front hull. And the advantage of these machine guns is that they can be fired regardless of whether the vehicle is opened or buttoned up. An asterisk after the number, like with the German half-track and Panzer III, indicates a 360-degree field of fire, but the MG can only be fired when the vehicle is open. And then sometimes there'll even be a vehicle with a machine gun firepower that has an R superscript, like here with the Soviet KV tank. Hopefully you can see that R after the 2. It's pretty small. But that indicates the machine gun can only fire in the vehicle's rear turret covered arc. Now, this machine gun must fire in the same impulse as the other vehicle's weapons, but need not engage the same target, obviously, since it's firing through the rear turret covered arc. Otherwise, in that regard, a vehicle equipped with machine guns must fire them and its main gun in any order, but in the same impulse, and they must fire at the same target hex, although they can fire at different targets within that hex. All right, then the last thing we'll note is that vehicles with multiple machine guns must fire each separately. They can't combine the machine gun's firepower. To the left of a vehicle's morale is its HE, or high explosive, equivalent. Here's 2 German tanks and a French armored car from Heroes in Defiance. The HE equivalent boxed value is the vehicle's firepower when it scores a hit on non-vehicle targets with its ordnance. So, for example, if the Panzer IV fires its main gun and scores a hit on a French infantry squad, its HE equivalent of 3 means it would attack that squad with 3 firepower. If a number and an X precedes the HE equivalent, then the main gun can fire that many times per impulse. For example, the Panzer II could fire 3 times per impulse. Now, a vehicle that fires its main gun more than once in an impulse can fire at more than one target, but the targets must be in the same or in adjacent hexes. Finally, if the HE equivalent is an asterisk, like with the French armored car, then its ordnance can't fire at non-vehicle targets. So here, the AMD 35's gun couldn't fire at the German infantry squad. Now let's talk about open and buttoned status. Vehicles can either be, yes, you guessed it, open or buttoned up. First of all, open-topped vehicles like the Jeep and the German half-track can't button up. But how do you know if a vehicle is open-topped? Well, sometimes it's just common sense, like with the Jeep. But if it's an armored vehicle and you aren't certain, then check the back of the counter, where open top is written on the counter. Or if you're playing on Vassal, then check the vehicle's drop-down menu and see if there's the option to button up. For example, here with the German half-track, there is no option to button up. So that means it's open-topped. But if you go to, say, the Panzer IV, this tank, there is the option to button up. So it's not open-topped. You'll also find a list in every module-specific rule set of the open-top vehicles in that game. For example, here for Heroes of Normandy, in the module rules, you'll find this list of all the open-topped vehicles in Heroes of Normandy. All right, and for tanks and other vehicles that can either be open or buttoned up, the rules say the default status, to avoid counter clutter, is open. So a vehicle is considered to be opened up unless it's marked as buttoned. Well, what, you may ask, are the advantages and disadvantages of being open or buttoned up? Well, here it is, straight from the rulebook. Open vehicles have some or all of their crew hatches open, and some crew members are riding with their heads and shoulders exposed to enemy fire, and so they're vulnerable to enemy small arms fire. But open vehicles can see the enemy better. They auto-spot adjacent hexes and can make spotting attempts with no penalty. They can also fire their 360-degree machine guns, the ones that are marked with an asterisk. Buttoned vehicles, on the other hand, have all their hatches closed. Buttoned vehicles are invulnerable to small arms fire, but cannot fight as well as an open vehicle, and that takes the form of having to add one to their ordnance to hit die rolls. Buttoned vehicles also do not auto-spot adjacent hexes, and when they try to make spotting attempts, they have to add one to the die roll. And then at the bottom we read that vehicles can switch from open to buttoned, or vice versa, at the beginning of their impulse. Vehicles that assault move or assault fire must switch from open to buttoned, or vice versa, before moving for assault movement, or before firing for assault fire. So that's open and buttoned up. And then vehicles with turrets, like these tanks, can rotate that turret outside the hull's covered arc. If that happens, then the vehicle essentially has two covered arcs. one for the hull, and one for the turret. The two distinct covered arcs would then be used for fire and movement. One thing that's neat is that the turret counters aren't just generic markers, but are customized for that vehicle. As you can see, the Sherman's turret looks like a Sherman's turret, and the Panzer IV's looks like a Panzer IV's turret. Now, a vehicle's turret faces the vertex to which the gun's barrel points. It costs no movement points to rotate the turret, but there is an associated penalty on the ordnance firing table. The turret automatically rotates to face the target being attacked unless the player chooses to pivot the entire vehicle and thus incur the corresponding penalty on the ordnance firing table. All right, well, I said there was a lot of information on a vehicle counter, and I wasn't lying. But hopefully you're hanging in there, because next up is something very important. We're going to talk about the two-hit process and what happens when you score a hit. Vehicles, weapon teams, and even support weapons that fire ordnance have a two-hit table on the backside of their counter. Here on Vassal, you can bring them up from each piece's drop-down menu. So here's the Panzer IV's two-hit table, and the anti-tank guns, and the Panzerfaust. The two-hit table contains important information. To be precise, there's 3 sets of ranges, and 2 hit numbers, and penetration values. The 3 ranges are separated into columns at the top of the table. Below each of these ranges, in the middle row, are the 2 hit numbers, and below each 2 hit number is a penetration value. So if we look at the Panzer IV's 2-hit table, we can interpret it as follows. If the target is 1 to 7 hexes away, it has a 2-hit number of 9, and if it hits its target, a penetration value of 5. However, if the target isn't a vehicle, but say a squad, then the Panzer IV's HE equivalent is used instead of its penetration value. But more on that in a moment. Anyway, continuing. If the target is 8 to 14 hexes away, it has a 2-hit number of 7, and if it hits its target, a penetration value of 4. And if the target is 15 to 28 hexes away, it has a 2-hit number of 6, and if it hits its target, a penetration value of 3. And the Panzer IV can't fire its gun at targets over 28 hexes away. To determine if a target is hit by a piece of ordnance, you'll roll 2d6 and cross-reference the result with the 2-hit number below the relevant range column. The dice roll is modified by adding the target modifier of the terrain the target occupies, as well as adding 1 for each hex of degrading terrain through which the fire's line of sight passes. And you'll also take into account other factors that you'll find listed here on the Ordnance Fire Table. If the number rolled, modified by applicable modifiers, is less than or equal to the 2-hit number, then the target has been hit. Regardless of modifiers, though, a natural 2 is always a hit, and a natural 12 is always a miss. Let's walk through some examples to see how the 2-hit process works, and also see what exactly happens when you score a hit. First, let's see what happens when the target isn't a vehicle. Let's say the American M4 105mm howitzer assault gun is going to fire its main gun at the German squad over here in the light woods hex at F5. And for the sake of example, we'll say that F5 is spotted. Okay, the range is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hexes. So the American player will use the first column on the 2-hit table for ranges of 1 to 7 hexes. So the 2-hit number is 8. He'll add 1 to the dice roll because the target modifier for light woods is +1. And if he checks the ordnance fire table, he wouldn't find any other modifiers that apply, so it'll just be the +1 for the light woods. Now he'll roll 2d6, and to hit, the final modified roll will have to be 8 or less. The roll is 5 + 1 is 6, so that's a hit. Now the American player will roll 1d6, and he'll add the assault gun's HE equivalent, which is a whopping 5. The target modifier of the light woods hex won't factor in this time since it was already accounted for in the 2-hit dice roll. So the American player's roll will be 1d6 + 5. And the German player will also roll 1d6, and the two results will be compared. If the attacker's modified die roll is less than or equal to the defender's die roll, then the fire has no effect. But if the attacker's die roll is greater than the defender's die roll, each of the defending units must take a damage check by rolling 1d6, adding the difference between the die rolls, and then consulting the damage check table. All right, the American player's roll is 3 + 5 is 8. The German player's roll is 5. Since the American roll is 3 greater than the German's, now the German squad must take a damage check +3. So now the German squad will roll that damage check +3. The German squad's roll is 4. +3 is 7. So here on our old friend, the damage check table, we see that that results in the squad being shaken. Okay, so we'll flip the squad to its shaken side. We'll mark the assault gun as fired. All right, let's look at another example. This time, the target will be a vehicle. Here, we'll have the German Panzer IV fire on the American Sherman. The range is 5 hexes, so the German player will use the first column on the 2-hit table for the ranges of 1 to 7 hexes. So the 2-hit number is 9. If he checks the ordnance fire table, he won't find any modifiers that apply. So now he'll roll 2d6, and to hit, the roll will have to be 9 or less. The roll is 8, so that's a hit. Now the German player will roll 1d6 and add the penetration value from that first column on the 2-hit table for the 1 to 7 hex range. And here for the Panzer IV, that penetration value is 5. The result of this die roll will be the Panzer IV's modified penetration value. The American player will roll 1d6 and add the Sherman's armor factor at the point of impact. So now facing is taken into account. and the Panzer IV's shot will obviously strike the front of the Sherman. The other possibilities, of course, are side and rear. So, the shot strikes the Sherman's front, but does it impact on the hull or turret? Well, the answer to that is found by referring to the Germans' two-hit roll. Because if the two-hit roll is both greater than 2 and an even number, then the shell has impacted on the target's turret, assuming it has one. If the two-hit roll is odd, then the shell has impacted on the target's hull. Here in our example, the Germans' two-hit roll was 8, so the Panzer IV's shell impacts the Sherman's turret. That means the American player will roll 1d6 and add the armor factor for the Sherman's front turret, which is 4. The result of this roll will be the Sherman's modified armor value. The German and American rolls will be compared, and if the Panzer IV's modified penetration value is greater than the Sherman's modified armor value, then the Sherman is destroyed and a wreck marker placed in the hex. A couple of situations that rarely occur, but nevertheless it's good to be aware of the possibility, is that if the attacker's roll is a natural 1 and the defender's roll is a natural 6, the round is a dud and the target is not affected. However, if the attacker rolls a natural 6 and the defender rolls a natural 1, the round is a catastrophic hit and the target is destroyed and a wreck marker is placed in the hex. So let's play this out. The Panzer IV has hit the Sherman's front turret. The German rolls 1d6 and the roll is 4 plus 5, 5 being the penetration value at that range. So 4 plus 5 is 9. The American player's roll is 2 plus 4, 4 being the front turret armored factor. So 2 plus 4 is 6. Since the Panzer IV's modified penetration value of 9 is greater than the Sherman's modified armor value of 6, the Sherman is destroyed and a wreck counter is placed in hex E3. When a vehicle is destroyed by ordnance, 1d6 is rolled, and if the result is 1, then a good order crew counter is placed on the wreck along with a moved counter. Any other result, that is rolling 2 through 6, means the crew has been eliminated along with the vehicle. Let's reset the board, so to speak, and go to the sands of North Africa, where we'll find out what happens if the attacker's modified penetration value equals the defender's modified armor value. Spoiler alert, but this results in a non-penetrating hit. Here we'll have the German anti-tank gun fire on the British Crusader tank. The range is hexes, so the second column on the anti-tank gun's two-hit table will be used for ranges of 7 to 12 hexes. So the two-hit number is 6. If the German player checks the ordnance fire table, he won't find any modifiers that apply. So now he'll roll 2d6, and to hit the British tank, the roll will have to be 6 or less. The roll is 5, so that's a hit. Now the German player will roll 1d6 and add the penetration value for that second column on the 2-hit table for the 7 to 12 hex range. And here for the AT gun, that penetration value is 3. The result of the die roll will be the anti-tank gun's modified penetration value. The British player will roll 1d6 and add the Crusader's armor factor at the point of impact. So now, again, facing is taken into account. And the German anti-tank gun shot will strike the tank's side. And since the German 2-hit roll was 5, an odd number, that means the shot impacts the Crusader's hull. So it will be a side hull hit. That means the British player will roll 1d6 and add the armor factor for the Crusader's side hull, which is 1. The result of this roll will be the tank's modified armor value. The German roll is 3 plus 3, 3 being the penetration value at that range. So 3 plus 3 is 6. The British roll is 5 plus 1, 1 being the side hull armor factor. So 5 plus 1 is 6. And since the German anti-tank gun's modified penetration value and the British modified armor value are both 6, the result is a non-penetrating hit, and the Crusader must roll 2d6 and take a morale check. If it fails the morale check, the crew abandons the tank and a shaken crew counter is placed under it, along with a moved marker. So the tank will be abandoned. We just happen to have a shaken crew with a moved marker over here. We'll place them under the abandoned tank. All right, as far as abandoned vehicles, they remain on the map, but they can't be used by either side. However, let's say the Crusader passes the morale check. Then it's shaken. So it passes the morale check, but it's still shaken. This is the only instance in the lock and load tactical system where passing a morale check results in a shaken unit. Now let's say that the anti-tank gun's modified penetration value was less than the tank's modified armor value. That result would still mean the Crusader has to take a morale check. After all, it was still hit, but the impact just wasn't as severe. Anyway, when taking this morale check, the British player would take the difference between the anti-tank gun's modified penetration value and the tank's modified armor value and subtract that number from the morale check. So let's say the anti-tank gun's modified penetration value was 4, while the tank's modified armor value was 6. Then the Crusader would roll 2d6 to take a morale check, but could subtract 2 from the roll. 2 being the difference between the AT gun's modified penetration value of 4 and the Crusader's modified armor value of 6. And if the Crusader would fail this morale check, then it's shaken. But if it passes, then there's no effect. And if all this is making your head spin, just take a deep breath, because we'll see how all of this works in actual gameplay in just a moment when we go through that turn of our imaginary scenario. Oh, but before we go on, keep in mind that an already shaken vehicle that receives another shaken result is abandoned. And any ordnance hit on an unarmored vehicle, or a hit that impacts on the unarmored facing of an armored vehicle, well, that destroys the target vehicle. Then there are just a few loose ends we'll tie up before we get to the gameplay example. First, armor leaders. Armor leaders are single-man counters, like regular leaders, with a morale and leadership modifier, but they don't have a movement factor. That's because armor leaders are unique and that they share the fate of the vehicle they command. And a vehicle with an armor leader assumes the leader's morale for all purposes. So here, for example, the Sherman tank has a morale of 6, but if armor leader Sergeant Darius is commanding the tank, then it uses his morale of 7. It's important to note that armor leaders don't apply their leadership modifier to their vehicle's rally attempts. Instead, they lend the vehicle their morale. However, the armor leader does apply his leadership modifier to their vehicle's attacks. If forced to abandon his vehicle, an armor leader is removed from the map. And like regular leaders, armor leaders also have a leadership range and can activate vehicles in adjacent hexes, but not infantry units. And then, finally, there are just a few odds and ends to point out, like the fact that vehicles can self-rally, vehicles can assault move and assault fire, and vehicles can never enter a hex containing an enemy vehicle. All right, I think that's enough for now. We've covered the basics of vehicles and ordnance firing weapons, or at least enough to get us started with our gameplay example. We'll cover other concepts and game mechanics like overruns and close assaults as they come up during our gameplay example. But I think that we have covered enough to get us started with our gameplay example, so let's take a look at it. Unlike my previous videos, which were complete playthroughs of scenarios from the Lock and Load Tactical Starter Kit, this gameplay example will be just the operations phase from one turn of a battle that pits a mixed German armor and infantry force against a mixed force of American armor and paratroopers. As I mentioned before, we'll be using units from the Heroes of Normandy module. We're also using map 14 from that game. Let's take a quick look at the pieces on the map. As we start off, I'll just note that all turreted vehicles are closed, except the American M4105, which is opened up. And just for illustrative purposes, I'm using the turret counters on all the tanks and the assault gun. Let's start with the Americans. Over here in C6, they have a Jeep whose passengers are a 716 leader, Lieutenant Michael, and a half squad with a satchel charge. In Hex G5 is an M4A1 Sherman. Another Sherman is in Hex H7 with a 7-1 armor leader, Sergeant Darius. And we'll talk about the acquired counter in just a moment. Then in Hex F7, a light woods hex is a 606 leader, Corporal Medro, and a squad with a bazooka. Then in a brush hex in F8 is a 60mm mortar weapon team. Finally, in H8 is that M4 105mm howitzer assault gun with a paratrooper squad as a passenger. The Americans also have one off-board artillery fire mission of 5 firepower, which is available for either Lieutenant Michael or Corporal Medro to call in. As for the Germans, they have a half-track up here in I-1, along with a squad who is not a passenger. Another half-track is in H2 with Lieutenant Koch and a squad who are passengers. Then over here in E2 is a 75mm anti-tank gun. Next door in E3 is a squad with a Panzerfaust in a foxhole. Another squad with an MG42 is in a bunker in H4. Then there's a Panzer IV parked in I3. Over here in hex D5 is another Panzer IV, this one with an acquiring counter. And in our example, we're assuming that there was a previous turn in which this Panzer IV fired on the Sherman in hex H7, which has the acquired -1 counter on it. Acquisition counters are used when an ordnance firing weapon, like the Panzer IV's main gun, fails to hit or destroy a target. These acquisition counters grant the firing unit a -1 or -2 to their 2-hit die roll as long as neither the firing unit or the target moves. Okay, those are all the units for both sides. Then there are also wire counters in G4 and H6, as well as mine counters in E4 and H5. A wreck counter is located in hex F6, where a Sherman was destroyed in a previous turn. All right, I think that's enough to get us started with our gameplay example. As I said before, it's the ops phase, and the last thing we need to know is that the Germans have the initiative, so they'll kick things off. The German player has no shortage of targets at which to fire. However, the Panzer IV in D5 has a target acquisition counter in play, locked on Sergeant Darius's Sherman, which the German tank fired on unsuccessfully in the last turn. So the German player will again have that Panzer IV fire on that American tank, because the acquisition counter will go away if Sergeant Darius moves during the upcoming American impulse. So the German player will activate hex D5, and the Panzer IV will fire its main gun at Sergeant Darius's Sherman. Let's pull up the Panzer IV's 2-hit table. Like direct fire attacks, ordnance attacks have to meet range and line of sight requirements. The range is 4 hexes, so no problem there. The line of sight, however, is degraded by the wreck in hex F6. If we check the ordnance fire table, we'll find that the line of sight passing through a degrading terrain hex will result in a +1 to the 2-hit dice roll. Up here we see that there will also be a +1 because the Panzer IV is buttoned up. And then down near the bottom we find that there'll be a -1 for the target acquisition marker. So all of that means the German 2-hit roll will end up being a 2d6 +1. Checking the Panzer IV's 2-hit table, we see the 2 hit number at a range of 4 hexes will be 9. That means the Panzer IV's final modified 2 hit roll will have to be 9 or less to score a hit on the Sherman. The German roll is 6 plus 1 is 7, so that's a hit. Taking facing into account, the Panzer IV's shell impacts the Sherman's front, and the 2 hit roll was 7, an odd number, so that means it's a hull hit. Now an opposed die roll will be made to get a modified penetration value for the German hit and a modified armor value for the Sherman. The German player will roll 1d6 and add the penetration value for the relevant range, which in this case will be 5. So the roll will be 1d6 plus 5. The American player will roll 1d6 and add the armor factor for the Sherman's front hull, which is 5. So its roll will be 1d6 plus 5. The German roll is 2 plus 5 is 7, which is now the Panzer IV's modified penetration value. The American roll is 5 plus 5 is 10, which is now the Sherman's modified armor value. Since the modified penetration value of 7 is less than the modified armor value of 10, the Sherman isn't destroyed. This is a non-penetrating hit. However, the Sherman must still undergo a morale check, subtracting the difference between the modified penetration value and the modified armor value. Sergeant Darius is commanding the Sherman, which means his morale of 7 is used instead of the tank's morale of 6. So for the morale check, the American player will roll 2d6, subtract 3, and the final modified number will have to be 7 or less. The American roll is 9 minus 3 is 6, which is less than Sergeant Darius's morale, so the Sherman is unaffected by the Panzer IV's attack. And the Sherman is buttoned up, so the Panzer IV can't attack it with its MGs. So we'll place a fired counter on the Panzer IV and flip the acquired marker over to its -2 side. So if on the next turn the Sherman hasn't moved, or the Panzer IV isn't shaken or destroyed or decided to move, then 2 will be subtracted from its 2 hit roll if it fires at Sergeant Darius's Sherman again. Before we move on, we can note that if the Panzer IV's modified penetration value had been greater than the Sherman's modified armor value, then the American tank would have been destroyed, and Sergeant Darius eliminated with it. If the modified penetration value had been equal to the modified armor value, the Sherman would have had to take an unmodified morale check, and if it failed, it would be abandoned, and Sergeant Darius would be eliminated. If it passed that morale check, though, it would be shaken. Remember, this is the only time in Lock and Load Tactical when passing a morale check results in a unit being shaken. Okay, having covered those what-ifs, we'll call the German impulse done. And next up is an American impulse. Like the German player, the American player also has a multitude of targets to fire at, as well as other options, including calling in the off-board artillery fire mission. The Panzer IV that just fired is out of the equation for now, so the American player needs to focus on the other German units on the map, those that can still harm his side this turn, like the other Panzer IV in hex I3. So the American player is going to activate hex G5 and will fire the Sherman there at the German tank in hex I3. But there's a slight complication, since hex I3 isn't in the Sherman's current covered arc. That means the American player can either pivot the entire Sherman or just rotate the turret before firing. Doing either one of those things will add a +1 modifier to the Sherman's 2-hit roll. Pivoting within the hex isn't considered actual movement, so the Sherman wouldn't have to use assault movement to bring its main gun to bear. But the Panzer IV is buttoned, so the Sherman can't fire its machine guns at it. So it's just going to rotate its turret to fire on the German tank. All right. Let's pull up the Sherman's 2-hit table. At a range of 3 hexes, the 2-hit number will be 8. The line of sight isn't affected by the bunker in hex H4, but it is degraded by the brush there. So the ordnance fire table modifiers will be +1 for rotating the turret, +1 for the hex of degrading terrain, and +1 because the Sherman is buttoned up. The American player is going to roll 2d6. The modifiers, as we've just seen, will total +3. And so the final modified dice roll must be equal to or less than the Sherman's 2-hit number of 8. The roll is 7 plus 3 is 10, which is a miss. The Sherman's shell screams right past the Panzer IV. We'll mark the Sherman with a fired counter, and mark the Sherman and the Panzer IV with acquiring and acquired markers. That will be it for the American impulse. Next is another German impulse. After dodging a bullet, a big one, from the Sherman, the German player decides to return the compliment. So he's going to activate hex E2, and we'll have the 75mm anti-tank gun fire at the American tank in G5. Let's pull up the anti-tank gun's 2-hit table. The range is 4 hexes, and the line of sight is clear. At a range of 4 hexes, the 2-hit number is 9. There are no modifiers, so the German player needs to roll less than or equal to 9 with 2d6. The German roll is 8, so that's a hit. Remember, a 2-hit roll greater than 2 and even is a turret hit. The 2-hit roll is even, an 8, so it's a turret hit. But remember, the Sherman's turret is rotated, so the shell is going to impact the side of its turret. Now we'll conduct an opposed die roll. The German roll will be 1d6 plus 5, 5 being the anti-tank gun's penetration value at this range. The American roll will be 1d6 plus 4, 4 being the Sherman's side turret armor factor. The German roll is 4 plus 5 is 9, so that's the modified penetration value. The American roll is 3 plus 4 is 7, so that's the modified armor value. Since the anti-tank gun's modified penetration value of 9 is greater than the Sherman's modified armor value of 7, the American tank is destroyed. Now, when a vehicle is destroyed, 1d6 is rolled. If the result is 1, the crew survives and is placed in good order under a moved counter in the hex with the wreck marker. All right, the American player rolls 1d6 and it's a 3, so the Sherman's crew perishes. We'll mark the anti-tank gun as fired, and we'll remove the Sherman counter and replace it with a wreck. All right, and we'll also remove the acquisition counter from the Panzer IV. Okay, that's it for the German Impulse. It's always tough losing a tank. However, the American player mustn't despair and must press the attack. So he activates hex H7 and will move Sergeant Darius's Sherman. And because Sergeant Darius has a leadership range of 1, he'll also activate the M4105 next door in hex H8. Sergeant Darius, as an armor leader, can't activate infantry units, but the paratrooper squad here in H8 is a passenger riding on the assault gun, and so is considered part of that vehicle. With only his tank and the M4105 left, Sergeant Darius decides to take the fight to the enemy. The Sarge orders his driver to start moving their Sherman forward, going from H7 to G6. He spends 1 movement point of the movement factor of 10, since on the terrain effects chart, a road hex costs a tracked vehicle 1 movement point to enter. And because the Sherman moves, the acquisition markers are going to be removed. Okay. Now the American player pauses a moment before continuing the Sherman's movement to see if the German player wants to use op fire to attack it there in hex G6. And a loud boom shatters the air as a shell from the Panzer IV in I3 screams toward the American tank. Let's mark the Sherman as moved. Okay. Now let's pull up the Panzer's 2-hit table. The range is 4 hexes, and the line of sight is clear. The 2-hit number is going to be 9. The target is moving, so the ordnance firing table tells us that means there'll be a +1 modifier to the dice roll. And there's a +1 because the Panzer is buttoned up. So the German 2-hit roll will be 2d6 plus 2. The German roll is 10 plus 2 is 12, which is greater than the 2-hit number of 9. So that's a swing and a miss. The Sherman is buttoned up, so the Panzer IV's machine guns can't fire on it, so the attack is finished. We'll place a fired counter on the Panzer. And no acquisition counters are placed since the American tank is going to continue to move. All right, the Sherman enters hex F6, spending 1 more movement point. since the wreck doesn't cost the tank any extra movement points to enter that hex. Then it's going to enter E5, another road hex, so spending one more movement point for a total of 3. Now the Sherman is face to face with the other Panzer IV, but the Sherman can't enter hex D5 since vehicles from opposing sides can't occupy the same hex. But Sergeant Darius didn't order assault movement, so he must have something else in mind other than firing on the Panzer. The Sherman is going to continue to roll forward into hex E4, a clear hex containing mines, spending one more movement point for a total of 4. The mines don't add anything to the movement point cost of the hex, but they do attack the tank. Mines attack armored vehicles very similarly to a direct fire attack, that is, with an opposed die roll. The mines have a firepower of 1, so the German player will roll 1d6 plus 1. The American player will roll 1d6 and add the Sherman's lowest armor factor. And on most armored vehicles, this will be the rear hull, as it is here on the Sherman. It's 2, so the American roll will be 1d6 plus 2. There are no other modifiers. The German roll is 3 plus 1 is 4. The American roll is 4 plus 2 is 6. Since the Sherman's roll was greater than the mine's roll, the attack has no effect on the tank. The German player can still op fire on the Sherman there in hex E4 and declares that he'll do so from hex E3. Now, the German squad can't fire at the buttoned-up Sherman with its inherent firepower, but it has a Panzerfaust, which it can use, so the squad takes aim with the Panzerfaust. Let's pull up its 2-hit table. And as you can see, or hopefully you can see that, Panzerfausts are only effective at close range. In fact, it can only be fired at ranges of 2 hexes or less. At a range of 1 hex, the 2-hit number is 8, and if it hits, it has a powerful penetration value of 4. The ordnance firing table modifiers are +1 for firing at a moving vehicle, and -2 because the target is adjacent. So the German roll will end up being 2d6 minus 1. The German 2-hit roll is 7 minus 1 is 6, which is a hit. And 6 is an even number and greater than 2, so it's a turret hit. The German player will roll 1d6 plus 4, 4 being the penetration value of the Panzerfaust, and the result of that roll will be the Panzerfaust's modified penetration value. The American player's roll will also be 1d6 plus 4, 4 being the Sherman's front turret armor factor, and the result of that roll will be the Sherman's modified armor value. All right, the German roll is 1 plus 4 is 5. The American roll is 6 plus 4 is 10. Since the Panzerfaust's modified penetration value is less than the Sherman's modified armor value, the round doesn't penetrate the tank's turret. On top of that, since the attacker rolled a natural 1 and the defender rolled a natural 6, the round is a dud, which means the Sherman doesn't have to take a morale check like it would for a normal non-penetrating hit. We'll mark the German squad as fired. All right, so the Sherman has shrugged off an attack from a Panzer IV, has run unscathed through a minefield, and an unexploded round from a Panzerfaust has just bounced off its turret. And now Sergeant Darius orders his tank to drive straight ahead into Hex E3, where it's going to perform an overrun against the German squad. Oops. We need to leave behind the mine counter. There we go. So the Sherman will pay 1 movement point to enter E3, since foxholes don't add anything to the movement point cost of entering the hex. Although the Sherman does have to pay an additional 4 movement points to perform the overrun. So it's spent a total of 9 movement points. Overruns can be performed on hexes occupied by enemy multi-man counters and or single-man counters, but only in certain hexes, usually open type ones or hexes that provide no target modifier or defensive bonus. To be able to overrun, a vehicle must have 1 functional weapon, and in some cases this might require the vehicle to be opened up instead of buttoned. Also, a vehicle performing an overrun can't be carrying passengers riding on top of it. The final thing to keep in mind is that the vehicle performing the overrun can't be op-fired upon in the overrun hex. Okay, here to conduct the overrun, the American player adds up the Sherman's HE equivalent, which is 3, its machine gun firepower, which is 4, since the other machine gun, the one with the asterisk, would only be counted if the Sherman were opened up. And Sergeant Darius's leadership modifier of 1 is also added. Finally, there's always an extra 2 that's added to any overrun attack. So, when all is said and done, the American roll will be 1d6 plus 10. This is an opposed die roll, so the German roll will be 1d6 plus 1, 1 being the target modifier of the foxholes. The American roll is 5 plus 10 is 15. The German roll is 3 plus 1 is 4. Since the Sherman's final modified result is greater than the German's, the German squad must take a damage check plus 11, 11 being the difference between the 2 results. For the damage check plus 11, the German squad will roll 1d6, add 11, and compare it to the squad's morale of 5. Needless to say, the Germans are in trouble. Their roll is 4 plus 11 is 15. So we can see that for a good order multi-man counter, since 15 is greater than or equal to 3 times the German squad's morale, the result is it's eliminated. All right, so we'll send the squad to the graveyard. Can also get rid of this fired counter. The Panzerfaust and foxholes will remain in the hex. Just a side note, but if the German squad had survived the overrun, it'd be able to perform a close assault on the Sherman. Anyway, the Sherman still has 1 movement point left, and it's going to spend that 1 movement point pivoting within hex E3. There we go. It's still the American impulse, since Sergeant Darius used his leadership range to also activate hex H8 and the M4105. The German bunker in H4 still needs to be knocked out, and the American assault gun is just the thing to do it. The only fly in the ointment is that X isn't spotted yet. Both Panzer IVs also need to be taken care of. So the American player is going to declare that the M4105 will use assault movement, which means it'll be able to spend 5 of its 10 movement points moving up to a better position before it fires. Okay. So it moves with its passengers into hex H7. But as it moves into that hex, the German player announces he'll use op fire to attack it there. Attack it with the squad and MG42 in the bunker in hex H4. Since the M4105 is opened up, its crew is vulnerable to small arms fire, and the German op fire will be conducted just like a normal direct fire attack, that is, with an opposed die roll. And the paratrooper squad passengers are considered part of the vehicle and so aren't targeted separately. The range is 3 hexes, and the line of sight is clear. The German roll will be 1d6, plus 1 for the squad's inherent firepower, plus 3 for the machine gun's firepower, and minus 1 for firing on a moving vehicle. So the attack ends up being a 1d6 plus 3. The American will use the same roll for the assault gun and the squad, but there'll be 2 results from that 1 die roll. For the M4105, the roll will be 1d6 plus 2, 2 being the assault gun's lowest armor factor for its rear hull. But the outside passengers only benefit from a maximum of plus 1 for protection by the vehicle, so for the squad, the roll will be 1d6 plus 1. All right, the German roll is 5 plus 3 is 8. The American roll is 2 plus 2 is 4 for the assault gun, and 2 plus 1 is 3 for the squad. Since the German result is 4 greater than the assault guns, the M4105 will take a damage check plus 4. And since the German result is 5 greater than the squad's, it'll take a damage check plus 5. The American player will now roll that damage check plus 4 for the assault gun. 5 plus 4 is 9, which is greater than the assault gun's morale of 6. So we go across the top row to armored vehicle. We go down this column to die roll greater than morale, but less than 2 times morale. And we find the result is the M4105 is shaken. Now the roll for the squad is 3 plus 5 is 8, which is greater than the squad's morale of 6. Checking the table for a good order multi-man counter, die roll greater than morale, but less than 2 times morale, we find that the squad is also shaken. Back here on the map, we'll place a shaken marker on the assault gun. Even though it's using assault movement, a moved marker is placed on it too, and it can't continue to move or fire due to the shaken result. Okay. Then we'll also flip the paratrooper squad over to its shaken side. Shaken passengers riding on the outside of a vehicle must immediately disembark, and they're placed under a moved counter. This action has an implied movement point cost of 2 if the defender wants to op fire on them. So they'll disembark. We'll place a moved counter on them. Make sure we did all that right. Okay. Finally, we'll place a fired counter on the German squad. And with that, the action-packed American impulse comes to an end. The Germans are hanging tough, but they need to get some infantry forward. Sergeant Darius's Sherman is a concern, but both Panzers and the anti-tank gun are still in good order and can deal with the Sherman during the next turn. So the German player is going to activate hex H2 in order to move the half-track that's there. And just to note that Lieutenant Koch is a passenger and part of the vehicle, and he's not an armor leader, so he can't activate the adjacent hex, which contains another half-track and a non-passenger squad. Anyway, the German player moves the half-track to hex G2, spending 1 movement point out of the half-track's movement factor of 11. Then it enters hex F3, paying another 1 movement point. And from F3, it goes to F4, paying another movement point for 3 total. To disembark its passengers, the half-track will have to spend half of its movement factor, which here, since that's 5.5, it's rounded up to 6. Light woods cost a T-type vehicle 4 movement points to enter, so the half-track can't enter the light woods hex in F5 and disembark its passengers this impulse. So the German player decides to dismount Lieutenant Koch and the squad in hex F4, paying the 6 movement points for a total of 9. So we place Lieutenant Koch and the squad under the half-track counter now, showing that they've disembarked and they're no longer passengers on the half-track. Using double-time movement, Lieutenant Koch and the squad will have 6 movement points. However, they've paid half of them to disembark, and so that leaves them 3 movement points to use. The German player wants to move them into the light woods hex in F5, which will cost them 2 movement points. But before they can do that, the American player declares he's going to use the paratrooper squad and bazooka in F7 to op fire on the Germans there in hex F4. Corporal Medro isn't going to participate in the attack, but the paratrooper squad can fire its inherent firepower at either the German half-track or Lieutenant Koch and the squad, as per Rule 17.2, which states, small arms firing on a hex that contains both vehicle and non-vehicle units must either target a specific vehicle or all non-vehicular targets in the hex. Okay. And since the German half-track is an open-topped vehicle, the paratrooper squad can use its inherent firepower to attack it, or, of course, it can attack the German leader and squad. Likewise, the bazooka can be fired at either the half-track or Lieutenant Koch and the squad. Well, the American player decides to use the paratrooper squad's inherent firepower and the bazooka against the German half-track, hoping to knock it out of the fight and deal with Lieutenant Koch and the German squad by other means. The squad's inherent firepower and the bazooka will fire separately. The range is 3 hexes, and the line of sight is okay, although it is degraded twice by the wreck in F6 and the light woods in F5. For the paratrooper squad's inherent firepower attack, it will be 1d6 plus 2 for the squad's firepower, minus 1 for firing on a moving target, and minus 2 for the 2 hexes of degrading terrain. So the attack will end up being 1d6 minus 1. The German half-track's roll will be 1d6 plus 0, 0 being the half-track's lowest armor factor. The American roll is 5 minus 1 is 4. The German roll is 2 plus 0 is 2. And since the attacker's result of 4 is 2 greater than the defender's roll of 2, the German half-track will have to take a damage check plus 2 versus its morale of 6. The German player will now roll the half-track's damage check plus 2. The roll is 5 plus 2 is 7. So here on the damage check table, we find the armored vehicle column, and over here, die roll greater than morale, but less than 2 times morale, and we find the result is that the German half-track is shaken. All right, so we'll mark the half-track as shaken. Now the paratrooper squad will fire the bazooka. Let's pull up the bazooka's 2-hit table. At a range of 3 hexes, the 2-hit number will be 7. The ordnance firing table modifiers are plus 2 for the wreck and the light woods hex, 2 degrading terrain hexes, and then plus 1 because the target is moving. So the 2-hit roll will be 2d6 plus 3. The roll is 4 plus 3 is 7, so that's a hit. The half-track only has 1 set of armor factors, so we don't have to worry about a hull or turret hit, and the bazooka round slams into the half-track's front. To get the modified penetration value, the American roll will be 1d6 plus 3, 3 being the bazooka's penetration value at this range. To get a modified armor value, the German roll will be 1d6 plus 1, 1 being the half-track's front armor factor. The American roll is 1 plus 3 is 4. The German roll is 5 plus 1 is 6. Since the German modified armor value of 6 is greater than the American modified penetration value of 4, the bazooka round doesn't penetrate the half-track's armor, but the half-track must still take a morale check, subtracting the difference between the results. The results are 6 and 4. 6 minus 4 is 2, so the half-track will roll 2d6 and subtract 2. The German player rolls the half-track's morale check, and it's 11 minus 2 is 9, which is greater than the half-track's morale of 6. We know that result on the damage check table means the half-track is shaken, But since it's already shaken from the paratrooper squad's inherent firepower attack, that means this second shaken result will mean the half track is abandoned. So we'll place an abandoned marker on the half track. We'll place a fired counter on the paratrooper squad. And because the half track is abandoned, that means a shaken crew counter must be placed under a moved marker in that hex. So let's pull up a crew counter, flip it to its shaken side, send it to the bottom of the hex, and mark it as moved. All right, let's make sure that's correct. Well, Lieutenant Koch and the squad got placed above the half track, but we know they aren't passengers any longer. All right, now Lieutenant Koch and the German squad can finish their movement. Remember, the German player wanted to move them into the woods hex in F5, which they will now do, spending 2 movement points for a total of 5 of 6, and they're going to stop there. So we'll mark them with a moved counter. Okay, make sure everything's right. Yes. Yes. Okay. And that's the end of the German impulse. There's a lot going on here on the map with our little battle, but the American player still has some units to get into the fight. So he's going to activate hex C6. The Jeep there has passengers in the form of Lieutenant Michael and a 144 half squad with a satchel charge. The Jeep will spend half of its movement factor, 10 movement points of its 20 movement factor, to dismount Lieutenant Michael and the half squad. Then the Jeep is going to pivot in that hex, spending 1 movement point. It's going to move into hex D7, spending 2 more movement points, since it cost R-type vehicles 2 movement points to enter a clear terrain hex. But once there, it's going to pivot once more, spending another movement point for a total of 14, and ending there under a moved counter. And from there, it's going to be ready to provide fire support with its machine gun during the next turn. Lieutenant Michael and the half squad disembarked using double time movement, spending 3 movement points out of a movement factor of 6 to hop off the Jeep. From hex C6, they are going to enter the wooden building next door in D6, paying 2 movement points for a total of 5. And from there, they intend to spend their remaining movement point to attempt to close assault the Panzer IV in hex D5. To perform a close assault, there are certain conditions that have to be met, which are found in section 17.1 of the rules, and which I'm not going to go through every one of them. But the pertinent ones for our situation are that the leader and multi-man counter, that is the half squad, have enough movement points to actually enter the vehicle's hex, And even though the Panzer IV has already fired, vehicles can always defend in close assault regardless of their activation status. This is just like infantry can always defend in melee regardless of their activation status. And finally, the satchel charge counts as an anti-tank support weapon. To enter the Panzer IV's hex and perform the close assault, Lieutenant Michael and the half squad must pass a pre-assault morale check. A 2 is subtracted from the dice roll because they're attempting to enter the close assault from a hex with a positive target modifier, which is the case here since it's a wooden building. Lieutenant Michael will check first, and if he passes, the half squad can apply his leadership modifier to their morale check. So the American player will roll 2d6 for Lieutenant Michael and subtract 2 for the wooden building hex. The roll is 7 minus 2 is 5, which is less than his morale of 7, so Lieutenant Michael passes his pre-assault morale check. Now the half squad's check will be 2d6 minus 3, 2 for the wooden building, and 1 for Lieutenant Michael's leadership modifier. The roll is 9 minus 3 is 6, which is equal to the half squad's morale of 6, so it also passes its pre-assault morale check. If Lieutenant Michael and the half squad had failed their morale checks, they'd remain in hex D6 under a moved counter. If the half squad had failed, Lieutenant Michael wouldn't be able to perform the close assault alone since he'd be a single-man counter with no eligible support weapon. The satchel charge is an eligible support weapon, but of course it's possessed by the half squad. But here both American units passed their morale checks, so now they can conduct the close assault. Lieutenant Michael and the half squad will move into hex D5 with the Panzer IV. Now the half squad will assault the German tank, and Lieutenant Michael will assist with his leadership modifier. If there was more than one American multi-man counter involved in the close assault, each would attack the Panzer IV separately. However, Lieutenant Michael would only be able to assist one of those attacks. Anyway, the close assault will be performed like the other opposed die rolls we've been conducting. The half squad is using a support weapon, the satchel charge, so it forfeits its own inherent firepower, which is fine considering the satchel charge has an impressive 6 firepower. For the attack, the American player will roll 1d6 plus 7, 6 for the satchel charge, and 1 for Lieutenant Michael's leadership modifier. For the Panzer IV's defense, the German player will roll 1d6 plus 2, 2 being the tank's lowest armor factor. Alright, the American player's roll is 2 plus 7 is 9. The German roll is 5 plus 2 is 7. Since the close assaulting Americans' result is greater than the Panzer IV's, the German tank is destroyed. The Panzer IV will be replaced with a wreck counter, and there's no roll for crew survival. The satchel charge, since it's a single-use support weapon, will be removed. And Lieutenant Michael and the half squad will remain in the hex under a melee counter. Just a side note, but if the Americans had failed to destroy the tank, they'd have been returned to hex D6 and placed under a moved counter. But here they succeeded. So, as the smoke from the burning Panzer IV rises into the sky, the American impulse is over. The Germans have one more hex to activate. Fearing the tide has shifted in the Americans' favor with the destruction of the Panzer IV, the German player feels the pressure to make something happen. So he activates hex I1, which contains the other German half-track and another 164 squad. Now, infantry and vehicles always have the option to use coordinated movement, during which infantry units and a vehicle move together, but they must begin and end their impulse in the same hex. As they move, they would, of course, pay the movement point cost of each hex relevant to their own movement type, and could assault move or assault fire if eligible. Coordinated movement is used primarily to give moving infantry units cover while crossing open ground. Here, the German player has separate plans for the squad and the half-track, so he decides to start off just moving the squad. He's going to move it toward Sergeant Darius's Sherman in a close assault attempt of his own. So the squad will move to H2, G2, and F3, spending 1 movement point to enter each hex for 3 total, and it will use its last movement point for the close assault attempt on the American tank. To enter the Sherman's hex, the squad needs to pass a pre-assault morale check. The German player will need to roll less than or equal to the squad's morale of 5 with 2d6. The squad's roll is 7, so it fails the check and will remain in hex F3 under a moved counter. The German player can still perform an action with the half-track, so now he assault moves it up to hex G2, spending 2 movement points total, where it's going to make a low percentage attack on the American Jeep down in D7. The range is 6 hexes, which is within the 10 hex range of the half-track's 2 firepower machine gun. The line of sight is clear, although the abandoned half-track in F4 does make it a degrading terrain hex. For the attack, the German player will roll 1d6, add 2 for the machine gun's firepower, subtract 2 for using assault movement, subtract 1 for the degrading terrain hex, and subtract 1 for firing on a vehicle that's marked moved. So the roll ends up being 1d6 minus 2. The American roll will be 1d6 plus 0. 0 because the Jeep is unarmored and has no armor factors. All right, the German roll is 4 minus 2 is 2. The American roll is 3 plus 0 is 3. Since the German result is less than the Americans, the attack has no effect. We'll mark the half-tracked with fired and with assault moved counters. And with that, the German impulse is over. The German player has activated all of his units, but the American player still has his 60mm mortar weapon team and also Corporal Medro, who can call in the Americans' offboard artillery. The American player activates Corporal Medro in hex F7, and using his leadership range, he activates the mortar weapon team in F8 as well. The American player will start off by firing the mortar at hex F5. F5 is spotted, of course, because Lieutenant Koch and the German squad are under a moved counter. The line of sight is clear, although normally the wreck in F6 and the light woods in F7 would be degrading terrain, but since this is a mortar and it lobs its shells at the target, those two degrading terrain hexes don't affect its fire. The mortar has a minimum range of 2 and a maximum range of 30, so a range of 3 hexes to F5 is fine. To conduct an onboard mortar attack, the American player will roll 2d6, choose the higher one, and add it to the mortar's firepower of 2. The German player will roll 1d6 plus 1, the plus 1 being the target modifier or defensive bonus for the light woods in hex F5. The American roll is a 6 and a 4, so he takes the 6 and adds 2 for a final modified result of 8. The German roll is 3, plus 1 is 4. And since the American result of 8 is 4 greater than the German result of 4, the German units in F5 will have to take a damage check plus 4. The Germans will now roll that damage check plus 4, leader first. Lieutenant Koch rolls 3 plus 4 is 7, which is equal to his morale, so he's okay. And now the squad can apply his leadership modifier to its damage check. The squad's roll is 2 plus 3 is 5, which is equal to the squad's morale, so it's also okay. We'll mark the mortar as fired, and we'll get an FFE counter and place it in hex F5. So now any other unit that enters that hex during this turn is subject to a mortar attack. Alright, Corporal Medro will now call in the Americans' off-board artillery fire mission. To call in off-board artillery, a good order leader uses an impulse to place a spotting round counter on any hex in his line of sight. The hex does not have to be spotted. The line of sight can be degraded by 2 hexes, but cannot be blocked by a 3rd hex. Corporal Medro is going to place a spotting round in hex H4. That's the brush hex occupied by the German squad in the bunker. The line of sight is degraded by the wreck in hex G5. Now the American player is going to roll 2d6, a white die and a colored die. The American player rolls, and the white die is 3, the colored die is 4. The number of degrading terrain hexes the line of sight passes through is added to the white die roll, the leader's leadership modifier is subtracted, and then the modified white die roll is divided by 2, and any fractions are rounded up. The result is how far the spotting round impacts from the desired hex. Since the white die roll was 3, we add 1 for the degrading terrain, that is the wreck counter, to get 4. Corporal Medro's leadership modifier is 0, so we take the 4, divide it by 2, and the scatter result is 2 hexes. Now we figure out the direction. The colored die is the direction the round drifts. 1 is north, 2 is northeast, 3 is southeast, etc., etc. The result of the colored die roll was 4, so the spotting round will drift south 2 hexes, ending up in hex H6. Hex H6 is obviously in Corporal Medro's line of sight. If it wasn't, the fire mission would be aborted and he'd be marked Ops Complete. Anyhow, he can now adjust the spotting round 1 hex within his line of sight or cancel the fire mission. Off-board artillery affects/attacks the hex it's in and the 6 adjacent hexes, and it attacks both enemy and friendly units. Corporal Medro obviously doesn't want the off-board artillery to hit the M4105 and the paratrooper squad in H7, so he's going to adjust the spotting round north 1 hex to H5. The spotting round is now replaced with an FFE counter, and the off-board artillery will hit all 7 hexes in its impact area. Actually, only 1 German unit is in the impact area, the German squad in the bunker in H4. The American roll will be 1d6 plus 5, since we were told the off-board artillery is 5 firepower. The German roll will be 1d6 plus 2, 2 being the defensive bonus for the bunker. The American roll is 2 plus 5 is 7. The German roll is 5 plus 2 is 7. Since the results are equal, the off-board artillery attack has no effect on the German squad in the bunker. Corporal Medro will be marked Ops Complete, and the FFE counter will stay in H5. Any unit, enemy or friendly, that enters the FFE impact area for the rest of the turn is attacked by the off-board artillery. This is different than the onboard mortar's FFE counter, which only affects the target hex. All right, at any rate, that's the end of the American Impulse. And with no other units left on either side to activate, that means the ops phase is over, as is our example of play. The focus here was obviously more on gameplay mechanics rather than ideal tactics, so perhaps one side or the other did some things you might not have done in an actual game. But I think what did transpire helped us cover a lot of rules. Rules you'll use anytime you play a scenario that includes vehicles and or ordnance firing weapons. So, taking this video as a whole, now you know about the information on a vehicle counter and what it means. You know how to fire ordnance. You know how to conduct overruns and close assaults, and how to fire mortars or call in off-board artillery. Combined with the infantry tutorials in my first 2 videos, you should now have a pretty good foundation of knowledge to start to play Lock and Load Tactical. Don't stress about the rules, though. Don't focus on trying to play a perfect game. I mean, we all make mistakes. Remember, it's just a game, and the important thing is to have fun playing it.